This one isn't going to be easy. I'm not the best when it comes to discussing personal experiences, but in the spirit of self-development, let's go. There was a period where I'd finish a night shift, walk to my car, and just sit there, sometimes 30 minutes. Not on my phone, not doing anything, just sitting, because I physically didn't have enough energy left to drive. I was 28 and I was a doctor. Let me rewind a little bit because I think how I got here actually matters for this channel. I always wanted to do medicine. From the age of 11 to 12, that was it. I grew up watching Grey's Anatomy and ER, and the drama, the urgency, the meaningful moments in the corridor really pushed me to do it. There was actually a point where I was considering a toss-up between medicine and acting, but if I'm honest, I really can't sing, so that settled that. I was academic, I was competitive, I liked that medicine was hard to get into. That made it more appealing rather than less. By the time I applied, it wasn't really just a decision, it was what I was going to do no matter what. Fast forward, I qualified in 2019, went into surgical training, and eventually ended up in ENT or head and neck surgery. I did a research degree along the way, published some papers, everything was going according to plan, and I was doing everything right. But what I didn't appreciate until I was well inside the system was how completely that path consumes you. Medical training in the NHS operates like a conveyor belt. Every single decision you make, every opportunity that comes up, gets filtered through one single question. Is this good for the next step on the ladder? And over time, that became so ingrained that I'd stop evaluating my life by any other measure. I passed on opportunities to work in Australia, traveling, experiencing something different, living somewhere else for a year. I turned all that down because I convinced myself that the career move was the right choice for my future self. I think about that now and then, and I find it genuinely hard to understand. But at the time, it felt completely rational. That's how deep the tunnel vision goes when you're in this system. But worse than that, what nobody prepares you for is what that environment does to you on a basic human level. The NHS shifts weren't just long, they were unpredictable. You would finish at 11 p.m. and then be back in the next day for 8 a.m., 4 days in a row. And then every 6 months or so, you would have to move to a different hospital, sometimes miles and miles away, and you'd be expected to just uproot and adjust. New team, new rota, new commute. That was just the norm, all overnight. And every single patient interaction during those periods was hard. Not because the patients were being difficult people, they weren't. It was just by the time that they'd saw me, they'd been waiting in A&E 12 hours to see a doctor there, then another 4 hours to see me from a specialty. They were sitting in pain, in a noisy, frightening, uncomfortable environment for most of the day. Of course they were upset. Of course they were frustrated. And that frustration got channeled into whoever was standing in front of them, which was me. Every single time, every single shift. My weight had crept up to nearly 100 kilograms. I'd let it happen without really even noticing. Triple digits felt like a line that I couldn't cross, and the fact that I was nearly there and hadn't seen it coming scared me more than the number itself. My mood had become completely dependent on my career progress. A good audit, a paper accepted, positive consultant feedback, that's what determined whether I felt okay or not. Nothing else really even registered. And also, I was very good at ignoring it, but I knew somewhere deep down that surgery probably wasn't the right environment for me. But my ego just would not let it go. I just kept telling myself that if I don't give it a proper go, if I don't really try, I'd regret it forever. And so I just kept pushing, again and again and again. The moment it became impossible to ignore wasn't really a single catastrophic event. It was more like a gradual experiment that kept failing, over and over again. I started to scale back my hours in an attempt to find some way to fit in the balance. I went down to 80%, thinking it would take the edge off. The hardships persisted, the bad habits continued, and the toxic politics of departments still found me. So I went down to 60%. Same thing. And then I started looking properly at the people above me. The registrars, exhausted, unhappy. The consultants above them, the same. These were people who had made it, who had reached the rungs that I was climbing towards. I raised it gently, and the answer was always the same. It gets better when you reach the next milestone. Just keep pushing through. But it never did get better, and at some point, I stopped believing that it would. Why am I continuing to put myself through this to arrive somewhere that looks exactly like this? I'd started to build something on the side, reading about longevity, started to work out what a different kind of practice might look like. But I kept it hidden, completely hidden. I was scared of being ridiculed, scared of being seen as someone who wasn't fully committed. Multiple mentors, people that I respected, tried to talk me out of it when they eventually found out. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. How will you get any satisfaction from this? Longevity medicine isn't real medicine. I've heard it all, and I understood where it was coming from, but it didn't align with what I was seeing in front of me every single day. Here's the thing though. My interest in all this didn't just start when I worked in the NHS. It started years before in a way that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. When I was at university, one summer I went to Thailand. Not for a holiday, I signed up, rather crazily, for a 6-week intensive kickboxing camp. 6 hours of training a day, whole foods prepped by a chef on site, structured recovery built into every single session, complete immersion. And while I was there, I met a doctor who had been based at the camp for months. He left conventional practice and was working with people who struggled with the physical and mental toll of life that they'd built back home. Burnout, metabolic decline, the accumulation of years of ignoring the basics. He wasn't treating disease. He was there helping people recover the foundations that they let erode. I remember thinking to myself, I've flown halfway around the world to build something that should just be a normal part of life. Moving your body properly, eating the right foods, actually recovering. Why does that feel like such a radical intervention that pushed me to buy a plane ticket? When I came back from Thailand, I was in the best shape of my life, physically and mentally. I was determined to hold on to it. And I did for a while. I built the habits and the routines. I kept training, kept eating well. But then I started working for the NHS. And within a couple of years, it had unraveled almost everything. And that's what pushed me to read more and more about longevity properly. I wanted to understand the mechanics, the biochemical pathways they never taught us at medical school. I wanted to know exactly what was going on underneath the surface when you deprive the body of sleep for years, or when muscle mass deteriorates, or when you're chronically stressed. And I also wanted to separate out what genuinely works from the trends and the noise that fill up the wellness space. Now, one useful thing that did come of all those years on the conveyor belt, I learned how to properly evaluate research. In academic medicine, one of the standard ways to get published is to do a systematic review. You take a topic, find every single paper that's ever been written on it, assess the quality of each one, and interpret the findings collectively. It's thorough, it's slow, and I genuinely loved it. Geeky, I know. That's the methodology I started to apply to longevity medicine. Topic by topic, going through the actual evidence rather than taking anyone's word for it. And what I found was that the science, the real, peer-reviewed, well-replicated science, is much clearer than the wellness industry wants you to believe. The answers aren't mysterious, they aren't complicated, they're just buried under a lot of noise. I left the NHS last November. Since then, I've lost 10 kilograms. I've stopped drinking alcohol. I sleep 7 hours consistently. My Whoop biological age, which was sitting 5 years older than my actual age while I was still working, is now 6 months younger. I'm on a journey that still needs work, but I'm starting. I've made progress. I'm working more hours than I did when I was in the NHS with considerably less financial security, and I feel better than I have in years. The metrics reflect that. The way I feel reflects that. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when you actually apply the evidence. I'm now the medical director at Thrive, a longevity and wellness clinic based in Manchester. The work here is an applied version of everything that I've been reading, helping people track the right biomarkers, build sustainable habits, and understand exactly what's worth their time and attention. And this channel is the other side of that. Every video I make is essentially an abridged systematic review. I go through the research on a given topic. All of it, not just the papers that support a particular conclusion. I assess the quality of evidence and pull together what we actually know. I then put all of those sources into a citation library, which I'll link in each description for each video, so you can go through the research yourself and find out exactly what you need to know. The reason I do this is because the wellness and longevity space is full of misinformation, full of influencer-led advice that isn't grounded in evidence, trends that spread faster than the research can evaluate them, and confidence claims built on almost nothing. I'm not interested in adding anything to that. What I want to do is help people navigate it, show you what the evidence actually says, what's solid, what's contested, and what is marketing dressed up as science, and then let you make your own decisions. My next video will be on muscle mass, why it's one of the most consistent predictors in the longevity data, what happens to it when we age, and what the research says about preserving it. That's where we start. If any of this sounds useful to you, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, look after yourselves.